I don't know what compelled me to finally share this, but I have been thinking about it a lot the past few days, and thought it bit this sub relatively well. I'm one of those long-time lurkers who has been sitting on their own story for ages, but I finally got around to writing my experience down and hope someone out there finds this interesting read. Apollo didn't advance for the length. I have a lot of thoughts about this. Prayed for my life. When I was about 8 years old, my parents were going through a divorce, and my older sister and I used to spend a lot of time in her grandparents' house. It's a long ransom home on a corner in a very nice neighborhood that's a 10-minute walk from my gas station, grocery store, fast food restaurants. The streets are long and lined with well-manicured houses, cradled by big scenic California Valley hills all around. We were never very wealthy, but my grandpa bought it as a fixer-upper many years ago, and the property value has skyrocketed since then. As you can imagine, it's a very safe spot. And although there weren't many other kids in the neighborhood, it wasn't uncommon to see neighbors walking their dogs or pushing a stroller down the sidewalk outside our house. Although my mom was especially protective all our lives, this particular neighborhood was densely populated, and she grew up in that neighborhood herself, so she was understandably trusting. Once in a while, she would let my sister and I walk to the Rotten Robbie gas station on the other end of the block to grab a snack. I would always get a ring pop, and my sister would grab 3 Musketeers before we made our way back home. My sister was about 11 at the time, and a small amount of freedom was a really big deal to us. Nothing compared to walking down that street all by ourselves in the summertime, laughing and joking around. A couple dollar bills in her pockets, I felt like I owned the world. The one oddity I ever noticed around the neighborhood was a small camper parked on the side of the road opposite to the gas station, right along the backside of the fence of another house. It sat there in the shade like a permanent fixture. All the windows constantly, I can't explain why, but it always gave me this deep sense of foreboding when I pass it. I was almost positive someone was living inside it, because at times I hear the air conditioning running. If it's that stagnant in the same spot, the hairs on my neck would always stand on end as I passed it, particularly as I passed the door. And I'd always keep an eye on it for the fear that one day it'd swing open just as I came to pass by. I think what bothered me the most was it drawing tape to the door from the inside. It was extremely messy. I can see the outline of something, a vague shape, but can never make out what it was intended to be. I never had the nerve to stop and spare long enough to really investigate, but each time I walked by, I'd steal a glance. Are you prior to the incident I'm about to describe? I was walking with my mom past the camper in the shade. We had just come to the park nearby, and unfortunately, past the camper before we could cross the street and continue walking, so I kept on walking right behind her and did an object when she walked past it. This time I felt a little braver. I was frustrated not being able to decipher the drawing for so long, and while my mom sped away, I stopped in front of the camper door and took a moment to really look at the drum. Upon closer inspection, the paper was filthy. I remember doing a project in elementary school where we sew printer paper and black coffee to make it look aged, and that's what it reminded me of. My mom walked on without noticing it. Stop following her. But my eyes text on that interesting dirt. Take scribbles until I can make it will look to be a tiny mill form face. My stomach turned trailed over the rest of the image. I didn't know what kind of creature it was at the time, but now I can look bad. Perfect circles like those made by a circular ring ruler. Its base was contorted, as if in pain. It was so graphically disturbing, and seemed to portray this odd sense of suffering that stuck with me for days as a child. I didn't know how to process it, and a mental image still makes me sick to think about. I never seen anything like it before. Adrenaline flooded my body and my chest hurt with fear, but it selfishly thought of my glorious little trips for ring palms and said absolutely nothing. Forward behind my mom. This was, in retrospect, a classically terrible idea. It's one of those things you scream at me and characters in movies for. Ever since my ill feelings toward the camera had been elevated by the drawing on the door, I thought about it every time we draw by. And about a month later, my mom once again gracious with several bucks and permission to walk down the Rotten Robbie and grab our respective snacks. I thought about telling my sister about what I've seen on the way there, but she was older and braver and I was terrified. She'd make me cross the street with her to check it out. A bright, sunny day, and I told myself a false certainty that nothing was going to happen if I didn't acknowledge it. Maybe it'd go away. We walked past the camper, and it was thankfully uneventful. On the walk back, I was feeling more comfortable. Go to focus on some open my candy wrapper while my sister walked alongside me. We passed the camper a second time, but I didn't give it half as much thought as the first time. I don't remember what we were talking about. but I recall being interrupted mid-sentence as my sister softly yet firmly said my name. There was a distinct fear voice that immediately set me on edge, like a bucket of ice water. All my senses heightened, and I became aware of everything, including the sound of haphazard footsteps about 10 feet behind us. It was accompanied by a heavy wrestling sound like a heavy backpack, and nervously turned my head to look. A man with a long, unkempt beard, and wearing many layers of ragged clothing stood behind us, burning into our backs as he walked. His movements weren't normal. It was a drunken shuffle, like each of his feet unimaginably heavy. I needed to be moved one grand effort at a time. His shoulders were skewed, head tilted downward with a strange arc of his neck. I can hear his shoes scraping the gravel with every step. But rather than shaming, genuinely intoxicated a direction like a zombie with a direct effort to frighten us. Behind him, I saw the camper door was wide open for the first time in all the years we'd spent living there, and realized this was the man who had been living inside. He's following us. I choked out tears. My mind was spinning as I stared straight ahead again. The wide street and sidewalks have normally empty all around. My sister grabbed my hand. She squeezed it hard enough to hurt without looking my way, speaking carefully under her breath. On the count of 3 we race home, she told me in a very serious tone of voice. I couldn't reply to the growing lump in my throat, but every single cell in my body understood we had to put some distance between us and this man as quickly as possible. She began to count steadily while we walked faster. And the most terrifying part, we heard them behind us. Oh, never forget it. The taste exactly like you imagine in your nightmares. The theory or pursuers enters away from grabbing your arm, or a fistful of your hair. A picture of myself being dragged into the van with nobody around to see or hear me. We ran so fast, we didn't even have the breath to scream. And peering back behind me about 10 seconds later, absolutely none of the impairment he showed with the zombie-like footsteps moments before. I think back on it now, and he may have been deliberately pretending to be handicapped to lower a guard, so we wouldn't start running. The thought, it's terrifying, but I can't rationalize it any other way. We made it to our grandparents' house, and without looking behind us, yanked open the stubborn old door before slamming it closed and scrambling past their excited dogs to get as deep in the house as possible. I don't even think we locked it, as our main goal was getting within line of sight of any adult as quickly as possible. My mom was talking to my grandpa at the table and gave us an amused look when we bounded into the living room. Since we were kids, running around wasn't anything out of the ordinary, and she didn't ask what happened as we collapsed on the couch and tried to catch our breath. The inside of the house felt so safe, and felt in such good spirits that it didn't even want to bring up what had just happened. Like waking up from a nightmare you didn't want to talk about. I was desperate to go back to normalcy. I wanted to forget it entirely, to unwrap my candy, and act like everything was completely normal for the sake of my own sanity, and that's exactly what I did. I asked my sister a few years back if she remembered the incident. I'm 25, and she's 28 now. And her response was strange. She remembered immediately without the need for me to provide details. But she quickly waved it off, and insisted it had been a bored homeless man looking to spook some kids walking home with no real intent to harm anyone. I don't know. I'd like to believe it's an innocent misunderstanding. But like they always say about gut feelings, they're rarely wrong. I feel in my soul that he wanted to hurt my sister, and that day I never told her or anyone else about the strange drawing on that door. And I'm not sure if my sisters saw the open door and connected him to the camper or not. If one of my biggest regrets, as I would hate for any other children to have been less fortunate after innocently walking past the camper in the shade. I believe he may have chosen the spot between the park and the gas station deliberately due to the number of children walking around the area. I never saw a camper again a day or so after this. I'm not proud of how I handled this, and we didn't turn it to anyone who find themselves in a similar situation to contact authorities immediately with you for the safety of others around. I don't know if maybe this whole story comes off as knowledge dramatic, but it was very real and very frightening in a way I can't forget. So possibly the range camper guy by the gas station. Whatever your intent was, let's not meet.